without whom none of this would be possible. And Mike Booza is here. Mike is the chair of the Nepicent group up in Flint, and he would like to say a few words. We have an action item.
Yes, we have an action item tonight. I've been working to make sure that somehow all the hard work that Mike Berkowitz has done to close down all these coal fired plants isn't undone. Just because we close down these coal fire plants doesn't mean they can't reverse this. I mean, if you're looking at what they're trying to do with nuclear plants right now, we're going to need electricity. We want it to come from renewable sources, and there's a huge battle going on right now. There's lots of different disinformation going on at the county level, and there's sometimes ordinances that are written that are very friendly to having a wind or solar farm sited there. And when when a company comes in and looks at trying to cite that, then the anti-wind and solar people come in, and it's a zoo. I've been doing this. I probably went to 100 of those meetings over the last 5 or 6 years, and it gets ugly there. I mean, they call you names, and it used to be dirty looks when I first started. They've gone beyond dirty looks at this point. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get some siting reform done at the state level. What that's exactly going to look like is still unknown, but there's a lot of good ideas. There's about 3 main good ideas out there. And I'm asking you to sign a petition asking the legislator to consider siting reform so that we can get these wind and solar farms built. And you got the honor to be the first one. I don't know if there's any quick questions. No? All right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, so what does siting reform mean? Regulations around where you can put it in.
Might come back and talk on where the camera is.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, repeat the question.
What does siting reform mean?
Yeah.
There's 3 main proposals out there that I kind of know of. Basically, what they're trying to do is set up some guidelines so that the townships can't say, there's one township I know that has a setback of 1.5 miles. So if you have that kind of setback, basically you kind of zoned up. So if they're trying to have the ridiculous sorts of things that actually, in essence, zone out some of these things, or make it so restrictive that the developer says, you know, it's not financially worth it to go into that township to, you know, they allow it. Technically, they allow it, but so they're basically going to be set up some guidelines that will allow the townships to have some say, so most of them are. That, but you know, it can't be so you zone out a project. Now there is one proposal out there that's got some support. I don't know how that will go. That basically says that they would all the zoning would kind of go through the Michigan Public Service System, and they would kind of do it that way. And there's some benefits to that. There's some benefits and drawbacks to all the plans, but that's kind of the main ideas out there. Yes.
So as an example, I live in Freedom Township. I have 28 in solar array. No problem with Freedom. But you go to Bridgewater next door. My neighbors are just trying to say can't get it installed. The township just cuts them off. One neighbor, soon I'm doing myself and hiding it until something changes in the law.
And they use ridiculous sorts of things. I mean, one of the more ridiculous ones I heard of is they shoot rays at birds and they come down in balls of fire. I mean, you know, so and that is one of the more ridiculous ones, but they have other ones, you know, they poison the groundwater and they're built like a windshield. Yeah. The windshield poisons the groundwater. So with this, I mean, so you know, there's lots of I call it disinformation. I think they've gone beyond misinformation with this. So that's kind of what's going on.
Thanks.
I don't want to steal his time.
So
If there's anything, what's that?
I'll talk about it a little bit more on this next page.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I like that's funny, not funny about the 1.5 mile setback, since a township is 6 miles by 6 miles. That doesn't leave you very much room to cite the renewable installation. Okay. Nancy, what's your book for book club this next month?
It's one about, the history of animals in the New World. The book actually looks like a little mammoth.
You were, where's John? Right, you're just telling me about
Wild
it.
New World.
Wild New World? Okay, so find the book club on Meetup. Okay. So since people take time out of their lives to come to these meetings, even on a nice evening like this, we like to tell you some good stories and some wins. And I have two to report to you before we get to Mike's presentation. First of all, the Michigan chapter award ceremony last month was a big success. It was the most folks we've ever had at an in-person event in my memory, well over 100. What do you think, Nancy?
I counted about 100.
Yeah, normally our program meetings are, you know, in smaller rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100 is. Our typical numbers used to be in 60.
Yeah. We hosted this ceremony because the honoree as environmentalist of the year was our own Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. And maybe if we had a free open bar at all our meetings, we would have better attendance. I don't know. We had plenty of other VIPs attending, including at least 3 state representatives, and it was a lot of fun. And so kudos to Sarah Tressner and Laura Zilstra, who's here, and Elaine Elliott, and everyone else who planned that event. That was a great time. Oh yeah, I want to salute a volunteer. Her name is Chris Koslow, and she is an outings leader. She lives in Monroe. She's a retired educator like me. And she studied at the feet of John Metzler, our outings chair, and she said, hey, I could do that. I could take people on walks. And lately she's been absolutely setting the world on fire. I think she's done 9 hikes since 2023 began. And she has a distinction of the trifecta. She's done a hike in every one of our 3 counties of our service area since the year began. And John and I went on a walk this morning at Erie Metro Park, and then at the International Wildlife Refuge on the Detroit River, which was a little bit muddy, but we had a good time. We had direct eagle flyovers, and we had an eagle just perch and pose in a tree right over our heads, and lots of other signs of spring. We heard the spring peeper frogs peeping. So get out there, find a wet spot near your own home, or better yet, sign up for one of our outings on our meetup page. And I want to say next month's program is sure to be a popular one. Please join us in April as Juliet Berger, the president of Washtenaw Audubon and Ann Arbor City Ornithologist, presents about the birds of Ann Arbor parks. Anyone who knows Juliet knows that she's a passionate, knowledgeable bird educator who loves to share her love of birds with everyone, whether they are a bird expert or a brand new beginner. The program will be on Tuesday, April 18th at 7:30 here at the Botanical Gardens and on our normal Zoom link. So you can sign up for that on the meetup page as well. So please join us next month, April 18th, 7:30, right here. Tonight, our speaker is Mike Berkowitz of Beyond Coal and of the Sierra Club. Michigan State graduate. He worked on the staff of the Michigan chapter of the Sierra Club for 9 years before moving to be the director of Beyond Coal, which I believe is a Sierra Club subsidiary. And he's going to tell us about the accomplishments and the challenges of that initiative. And I'll let him tell you the rest himself. So welcome, Mike Berkowitz.
I hope y'all don't mind. I'm gonna sit on this stool because I've got a bad knee and it's just gonna be a little easier for me. So thanks for having me first and foremost. My name is Mike Berkowitz. As Dan mentioned, I lead our Beyond Coal campaign in Michigan. The Beyond Coal campaign is one of the many campaigns and programs that the Sierra Club runs across the country and actually the world. I live right here in Ann Arbor on the Old West Side. If anyone knows, it's Slauson Middle School. I back right up to essentially like their basketball court and volleyball, the sand volleyball pit. And I also, when I'm not working for the Sierra Club, I also volunteer sometimes for the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability. I actually was recently appointed to the city's energy commission. So doing some fun work there, holding DT accountable in different ways as well. So let's see, Dan mentioned a little bit about my background. The other thing I'll flag is that I worked in politics before I got into this role. In 2010, I worked on a Democratic governor's campaign in Michigan, Burge Bernero, for folks who know him. And it wasn't successful, but it gave me the experience. It led me right to the Sierra Club store, where I worked for the Michigan chapter from 2011 until 2019, leading our work at the state capitol. And in 2019, I joined our Beyond Coal campaign and kind of stopped focusing on the Capitol so much and a little bit more on the Public Service Commission and some of the other stuff we'll talk about today. So I sold this slide from our national director of the Beyond Coal campaign. The Sierra Club has a 2030 framework, and the second bullet of this is what I mostly focus on, or the Beyond Coal campaign in general, is transforming our energy systems, replacing fossil fuels with clean energy. We have a goal of being beyond coal completely by 2030, and also making sure that at 2030, 80% carbon pollution-free electricity. So not just coal, but also working against fracked gas, other forms of fossil fuels in the electric sector. And then Beyond Coal campaign, we've got an interim goal set in 2024. We adopted this, I think, in 2021, kind of our 3-year, time frame. And right now we're on pace for achieving our goals. And let me show you what that looks like a little bit more meaningfully. Actually, before I jump into that, for folks who might not be familiar, I want to just mention our federal government passed the Inflation Reduction Act last year, and it is going to be a huge game changer for the way clean energy, building electrification, transportation is funded across the country. And in Michigan, we're expecting about $26 billion to come in to help jumpstart that work, or kind of push us to the next phase of it. We've already kind of jumpstarted it here, but we need to kick it up a notch. And so what is decarbonizing our electric grid, getting to 80% carbon-free electricity by 2030 look like? So here's essentially where this is 2021, the last year that we have like really solid completed data from. And I just wanted to flag that the Beyond Coal campaign's goal is kind of right here. So you can see we're like on target, we're kind of moving there. And the Inflation Reduction Act, just having passed that and all the funding that's going to come down to the states across the country, is going to move us somewhere within this range. So definitely accomplish our Beyond Coal campaign goal. But in 2030, we still have some work to do to ensure that we hit that target. And then I threw on here also the White House. They have a goal of 2035, 100% completely carbon-free grid. So that's kind of what the pathway looks like from our eyes. And across the country, there's a lot of different things that contribute to our need to decarbonize. But the electric sector is what we mostly focus on. It's the biggest one outright. And then for, I was going to say obvious reasons, but I'll just like the electric sector is, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions in this field, the most important sector to decarbonize first. If you clean up the grid and then you electrify our transportation and you electrify our buildings, then they're intrinsically powered by clean energy. If you electrify buildings and transportation, but you're still running coal plants and frack gas plants, then you're moving the needle, but not as much as we would like. And so you can see the electric sector is the biggest outright on its own. And then these areas that kind of have this weird shading are all other sectors that, once you decarbonize the electric sector, will benefit from having a clean grid.
What's the thing in parentheses on page 20% electrification industry, 31% and 20% electrification?
Yeah, so for transportation, this is to reflect that we expect if we want to, so like 16% of kind of all of the emissions that we need to, pull out of the system, 16% transportation across the whole board, and 13% of that we expect to meet based on modeling by just electrifying transportation systems. But they're like electrifying transportation is not the only solution. In fact, I personally think that transit and public transit mobility is almost more important, but just because of scale, it's kind of 3%. So that's what's in there. And then apologies, I don't know exactly what the 20%. I think what the deal is here is that like the industrial sector right now contributes 31% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And if we clean up the electric sector, then we only have to, you know, be like, it drops to 20% of that intrinsically. And this gets at a little bit about what Mike Buza was talking about. So if we want to electrify buildings and transportation and clean up the electric sector and not be dependent on gas and coal, Michigan needs to build 19 gigawatts of clean energy to power that sustainably. And that's in the average model. If you do actually in aggressive model, it can be anywhere as high as 27 gigawatts or as low as 13 gigawatts. For folks who aren't familiar, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but that's a shit ton of clean energy, right? And what Buza was talking about earlier is that, you know, we're actually having a lot of success shutting down coal plants, rejecting frac gas plants, but we're meeting stumbling blocks and all sorts of hurdles trying to build like large scale renewable energy all across the state. And so we need to like find some solutions and some parameters about how to streamline that, but also do it in a way that still protects communities, still allows for public involvement, and also like protects communities against like predatory developers who maybe are doing solar the wrong way. You know, not all developers are created equal. So this gives you a scale of the challenge at hand. And zooming in on Michigan, again, 2021, the latest year that we have full data for. Coal is at the top. You can see it's the largest, but it's decreasing dramatically. And actually, if we had data for 2022 and 2023, you would see this come down a lot. DTE pulled 2 of their coal plants, the Trenton Channel and the St. Clair coal plant offline in 2022, thanks to a legal settlement we secured. Lansing Board of Water and Light just retired their last remaining coal plant, also thanks to a legal settlement the Sierra Club secured. But the challenge here is that frac gas is growing, nuclear is consistent, and you know, not going anywhere. There's also a bunch of people out there talking about like modular nuclear, these small, you know, things that are super expensive, unproven, but they want more nuclear energy at small scale. So that's kind of what Michigan looks like now and what we're kind of trying to do. I mentioned this earlier, we've been really successful at shutting down coal plants. These are all the ones in Michigan, and the only ones that are remaining are this TES Filer City Station up in northern Lower Peninsula, and then the Monroe coal plant, which I think folks are probably familiar with. We'll talk about it more, but it's the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter in the entire country. Obviously the largest in Michigan. And it's our last major remaining target, but we have had success shutting down coal plants all across the state, Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula. For folks who know Jan O'Connell, she's been working on this for decades in West Michigan, and you can see just dramatic success over there as well. So the coal plants in Michigan that we're mostly focused on are DTE's Monroe and Bell River plant, and then Consumers Energy's Campbell plant. And I'll just point those out real quick. Consumers Energy, Campbell plant over here, DTE Monroe, and then the Bell River plant just a little bit north of there. The Campbell plant, I'm not going to talk about much today because it's in West Michigan, and actually last year we got another legal settlement that shut that sucker down. It's coming offline in 2025 thanks to our work. And these are just some little snippets about like the demographics around those plants. One of the things the Beyond Coal campaign tries to do is be really thoughtful about how you're like working in a community. What are the factors that, you know, you need to mitigate? What are the considerations about poverty levels, race, socioeconomic issues, all sorts of equity and environmental justice stuff. So I threw a few facts up here for you. I'm going to share these slides out after, or I'll share the link so everybody can read this in more detail, because I want to keep things moving, but thought you might be interested. And so our remaining coal plants, we mentioned this earlier, the Monroe plant and TES Filer City Station. This is from the Sierra Club has an analyst team, and they put this together for us to help us kind of dig into the data a little bit. So this is broken out by units. The Monroe coal plant has 4 units. You can see the years they started operating. Their total capacity nameplate means the like gross amount of power they can generate, and capacity factor is how much do they actually operate. So you can see actually one of these units in Monroe less than 50% of the time in 2019. Data's a little bit, you know, old. We'll freshen this up when new stuff becomes available, but it helps you get a snapshot of kind of what the amount of pollution is going into the air, how much the power relates to that. And just candidly, the Sierra Club is not super focused on TES Filer City Station. It's only a 70 megawatt plant. You can see that pales in comparison to even just one unit of the Monroe plant. So it's not a great place for us to spend our time, our strategy, our resources, our efforts. And actually, the EPA just introduced, folks may have seen this in the news, what they're calling the Good Neighbor Plan. Essentially, it's a plan to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions that go across states. So Michigan actually gets a disproportionate amount of nitrogen oxide pollution from like Arkansas and Texas and other states around the country that just come across the border without, recognition of state lines. And it is essentially going to require pollution controls on a bunch of coal plants across the country that don't already have them installed. And so TES Filer City Station, they do not have the appropriate pollution controls. We think if this rule goes into place, essentially that's done. The other thing I'll flag is that in Monroe, I'm forgetting the exact units, but 2 of the units, they do have those pollution controls installed, but they're super outdated. They're like over a decade old and haven't been refreshed or updated. So they're performing really poorly, and they will have to be updated if this rule goes through. So that's some exciting stuff and a little bit about our thinking strategically there. Gas plants. So we've also been successful at shutting down a lot of proposed gas plants. Right now, DTE is proposed to convert the Bell River coal plant to a gas peaker plant. So a peaker is a plant that just operates on like the hottest hours of the year and the coldest hours of the year, when our energy demand is at its highest, at its peak. And so you don't need to run them all the time, just a small fraction. The dot here is large, but actually if it converts to a peaker plant, it'll be really small. It'll probably only operate about 12% of the time, which you can see is less than any of the existing coal plants right now. And then the Lansing Board of Water and Light, they have proposed to build an expansion to their current gas plant. They have, I believe it's a 250 megawatt gas plant, the Delta Energy Center. They want to add another 120 megawatts to that to power one of GM's battery and like electric vehicle manufacturing facilities that was just announced in the Lansing area. However, we are working diligently to make sure that they don't do that and instead power it with 100% clean energy, which actually a lot of the auto companies, GM included, have committed to powering their facilities by 100% clean energy. And then there's one last plant we're targeting right now. It's called the Marshall Energy Center. It's a huge one. It would be essentially 1,800 megawatts combined. 1,000 megawatts. I'm thinking of a different one that we actually recently defeated that was 1,800. But this is in Southwest Michigan. It's a merchant plant. What that means is that it's not regulated by one of the state's monopoly utilities like DTE or consumers. It just sells energy straight out onto the market, onto the grid, or to whoever signs a contract with them. And so they actually haven't started construction yet. We've been challenging their air permit, particularly as like our main legal hook to try to stop it. Eagle, the state department that regulates permits for the environment, so far has not been friendly to our challenges to the air permit, but we're still working on this. Anyway, it's projected not to be developed until a couple of years from now. And so far, they have not found a buyer for any of their power. The developers have actually not even applied to the Midwest regulatory grid entity, MISO. So it's kind of theoretical at this point, but we're still taking it seriously. I'm going to skip this because I can tell I'm belaboring things a bit much and getting a little wonky. Yeah.
How do the gas plants compare to the coal plants in terms of negative impact on the environment? Coal plants 10 is the gas plant 6 or 9 or
It's a great question. Yeah. Absolutely. So Brent asked, how does a gas plant compare to a coal plant in terms of pollution? Say a coal plant is a 10. What is a gas plant? It does vary by the situation. And so there's kind of one thing that really determines this, whether it's considered a combined cycle plant or a peaker plant. I mentioned earlier, DTE wants to convert their Bell River coal plant to a peaker gas plant. Again, that means it runs only in the hottest and coldest hours of the year when the grid just really, really needs that extra energy. And so those are like a 1, maybe like a 0.5. I mean, they still have issues, right? They, exacerbate demand for gas infrastructure, but just the raw amount of pollution coming out, greenhouse gas emissions straight up are like dramatically less. So for example, if you wanted to match the levels of the Bell River coal plant with the gas peaker like pollution levels, it would have to operate 7 years for every 1 year it operates as a coal plant to even match that. And that's just greenhouse gas emissions. That doesn't even take into account the toxic air emissions that come out. So like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, which I mentioned earlier, are the two that we pay most attention to. Gas plants produce release way less of those toxic emissions. So in particular, particularly in the local community, converting from coal to gas does have major benefits for pollution reduction, but I'm not endorsing gas conversion. Especially if it's going to be a combined cycle plant where it's going to run essentially as much at one of those high capacity factors like a coal plant would, then it's really problematic. The other thing too with gas is that there's all sorts of problems all throughout the stream. There's methane leaks, there's pipelines, there's fracking in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and other places around the country that are already just like inundated with this stuff. So there's like up and downstream major problems. And so it's definitely not the solution for the Sierra Club. Every once in a while, we'll be in weird situations where we have to essentially not endorse, but just like not fight it 100% and just like pick our battles against the bigger ones or those combined cycle plants. Yeah, great question. So it's like, I mean, it ranges anywhere from, the question is how much more potent of a greenhouse gas is methane compared to carbon dioxide? I've seen anywhere from as low as 6 to as high as 26. I think the science normally says around 20%, worse, or 20 times worse, excuse me. And so, staying in the atmosphere a lot longer. So it's not a trade-off we want to make, is the bottom line. Absolutely.
I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about how moving to locally owned power and so here we have Ann Arbor Public Power, how that kind of is that, are you guys allied and how can that work to help further this mission as well?
Yeah, the Sierra Club, yes, thank you. The question was about municipalization efforts to essentially take back control of the grid and the power system from corporate monopolies like DTE, Consumers Energy, have it be community-based, things like Ann Arbor for Public Power. The Sierra Club is very supportive of efforts to municipalize. However, we have not strategically put a lot of our resources into these baskets. For anyone who's been in these battles, it takes a long time. It takes a ton of legal effort, actually. Often like just the research to get things going. It takes a ton of money, time, capacity, organizing, and often it just gets hamstrung in the courts. It ends up taking like decades. Most of the municipal power entities we have in Michigan were formed in like the late 1800s when this is just how we did it and had like a decentralized grid and like, things that didn't work the way they do now. And there are some good examples of municipalization across the country. And so the Sierra Club is supportive of it. We're just like, we have limited staff, capacity, resources. And so we don't put all our eggs in that basket. But if y'all have a municipalization campaign, we're happy to endorse and like spread the word and do that stuff normally.
I'm curious, can they help us?
Extrapolate on that. What do you mean? How they can help us?
Yeah, like it's like with Bell River, like how do they, is there a way to get some of the organizing around that to also help Sierra?
Yeah, good question. So the space where we are finding the most impact to shut down coal plants and reject gas plants are through legal mechanisms, legal challenges, and through the Michigan Public Service Commission, the state agency that oversees and regulates the monopoly utility companies in Michigan. However, like DTE, if like Ann Arbor for Public Power, was successful and like other municipalities in Southeast Michigan started municipalizing, DTE would see that as a huge threat to their power and would need to come to the drawing board more meaningfully. So I think it's a very good strategy. Also, like municipal utilities can do not whatever they want, but they have way more flexibility and less restrictions. So they can be like, yeah, we don't want any gas or coal. We're just going to do all clean energy. And like, oh, the state prohibits us from doing community renewable energy. Well, not us. We're not a regulated monopoly. We can do whatever we want. So I think they definitely could be a part of the solution. I don't think it's like the most effective thing to put our resources into, but it's definitely in the suite of tools that would piss DT off and scare them a bit, Yeah. Good question. Sorry, I'm just, so this is just a wonky chart that our analysts put together to show that the gas plants in Michigan, when you compare them to like replacing all that capacity with a suite of solar, wind, storage, efficiency, demand response, that it's cheaper to do the clean energy suite than it is to build the gas plant. And that, you know, by 2030 or 2032, you know, or 2028, 2029, these proposed gas plants would be what we call stranded assets, where now ratepayers are on the hook for paying for these things for like decades down the road, even though they're no longer cost effective after they went online. And just a snapshot, I stole this from the Michigan Climate Action Network. They have a great report that they update every year about this cities, townships, and counties in Michigan that have adopted climate or clean energy goals. There are a bunch of them that are countywide carbon neutral goals. So that means the entire economy of that community. Ann Arbor has the most aggressive one in all of Michigan, and like the Midwest, they want to, you know, be carbon neutral by 2030. There's also a couple 100% renewable energy goals. Traverse City in particular, they have their own municipal utility and are working on this very aggressively. And then there's a bunch of folks that they're just municipal goals. They want to have all the government buildings powered by 100% clean energy. It's kind of like the initial step before you can really look at the entire economy of your community.
Right.
Yeah.
Carbon neutral goal has a lot of potential for misinformation. Basically, you say we're carbon neutral, but we're doing that by trading off with somebody 600 miles.
Yes.
Not really changing things.
Yeah. So Nancy flagged that a lot of communities that adopt these, you know, climate or clean energy goals, they then will just do it through what we call offsets. Like they will trade with someone else somewhere on the grid, or, you know, maybe they'll just buy power from somewhere else, or they will, you know, allow like, we hate this, but like carbon capture and sequestration. They'll let a gas plant run and then just say that they're going to suck the methane or the carbon dioxide or whatever out and store it or use it some other way or whatever. These are all like false solutions that stand in the way to a true clean energy economy. Things like the utility industry, they call it renewable natural gas. We call it biogas. This is essentially like when you capture like methane coming out of landfills or wastewater treatment plants or agricultural digesters. I'm actually going to talk about DTE's program on this in a bit and why it's false and just filled with bullshit. Excuse my French. Just telling it like it is. So yeah, the Sierra Club is not cool with offsets. Some of these municipalities are cool with certain ones, certain like they're not. The city of Ann Arbor does have like a list of criteria they use to evaluate which proposals they're going to pursue, and equity, justice, and local benefits are like all key to those things. So the city of Ann Arbor, to my knowledge at least, is like not you know, jumping on board the offset train. But some of these others potentially might. The other challenge is that the state through our laws restricts the tools that these cities, counties, and townships have to decarbonize. And so sometimes they like don't have all the options they need. So yeah, we are not cool with that, but there are imperfect solutions being pursued for sure. Also carbon neutral, like, you know, we want 100% clean energy, not neutrality or net zero, like just like, you know, meeting that equivalent level. We want full decarbonization. So the Sierra Club, every year or every other year or so, we go through and we grade the 50 largest investor-owned utility companies in the country. The last one we did was actually before DTE's most recent filed plan. And so they, you'll see their score isn't fully updated, but Consumers Energy over the last few years, they've actually gotten much better. They're one of the top clean energy utility companies in the country, thanks to the legal work that the Sierra Club has done, essentially forcing them to shut down their coal plants, go beyond coal in 2025, rejecting fracked gas for the most part, and dramatically building clean energy. They're going to build 8 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2040. We're essentially working to front load that. They're like, oh, we'll do that in a few years. We're like, do it now. But the figure we showed earlier on like how much power does Michigan need to fully decarbonize or electrify was 19 gigawatts. Consumers Energy is committed to 8 of those gigawatts just themselves.
The company you were talking about, what company?
Consumers Energy. So, excuse me, Consumers Energy is the second largest investor-owned utility in Michigan. They actually provide gas to like a huge portion of Michigan, and then they provide electricity to like half of the lower peninsula outside of Metro Detroit, essentially. Yeah, great question. DTE, they stink. This should be a surprise to nobody. Their grade would be better if we had done this report and analysis after they filed their most recent plan, which came out last October. I guess they would probably be at like a D+ or C- or C maybe if they're lucky. There's still some major problems, but they have been the bigger problem. They are a Goliath. They are obsessed with fracked gas. They have all of the talking points. They dump so much money into politics and lobbying and greenwashing campaigns that it's very hard for us to challenge them and beat them in some places. So again, that's where we've found our more success in kind of the legal side of things with them and through some negotiations. These are infographics that go with them. You guys can check them out more time, but let's get into DTE specifically. So DTE and all utility companies in Michigan that are regulated by the Public Service Commission have to file what's called an IRP. It stands for Integrated Resource Plan. This essentially is their their energy plan for the next 15 to 20 years. They have to go before the Public Service Commission, make a proposal, and then all sorts of groups get an opportunity to weigh in on it, both technically and just like public comments. And then the Public Service Commission makes a decision on it after about a full year or 300 days. And so DTE's latest proposal, I mentioned this earlier, they want to convert the Bell River coal plant to a gas peaking plant. And the Monroe coal plant right now, before this plan, they were planning to operate it fully until 2040. They have moved it up in 2 phases. I mentioned earlier, there are 4 units at the Monroe plant. 2 of those units they propose bringing offline in 2028. Which actually is something the Sierra Club really likes and is on board with, and we filed testimony in support of that. The other 2 units they want to bring offline in 2035, not soon enough for us, and they want to replace it with a gas plant, one of those combined cycles, so it would operate like all the time. We'd be locked into it for like 30 to 50 years, and they want to stick carbon capture and sequestration onto it, which again is just like an offset and really problematic. It's also a terrible deal for ratepayers. It's like really freaking expensive. And DTE customers already pay way more than they should and get the worst service of like anybody in the country. Not the worst, but like bottom barrel. And so that would be a terrible deal for ratepayers, along with like the environmental, catastrophe that comes with that.
I just looked up in terms of fracked gas. According to the EPA, methane is over 25 times as powerful.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, following up on Erica's question earlier, she looked up online and confirmed methane is 25 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Yeah, so obviously not the solution we're looking for, and still problematic, especially in those larger plants. So we are where we are in this case. DTE filed their plan last fall. There was a virtual hearing on it in December that our coalition dominated. Every single person that made a commented in support of our priorities, moving up the retirement dates of the coal plants, not replacing it with gas, moving fully to clean energy. DTE also undervalued how much efficiency they can do. So DTE is required by the state to go in and help customers like use less energy, things like efficient light bulbs, insulation, all that type of stuff. They way undervalued what they can do. So our testimony says they should ramp that up considerably. And so we are essentially now entering the technical phase. We're doing what's called rebuttal. We're like going to be responding to everybody else that filed testimony in this case. There are some people that, despite the Neanderthal nature of it, they are arguing for not retiring the Monroe coal plant this decade or next decade. They are just saying, let's sit on it. We need a lot of energy in the market right now. Let's not be hasty and make any decisions. Who cares about pollution, whatever. It's not important. And also like, they don't believe the economics, even though we've dramatically proved it. And even the Public Service Commission staff themselves, kind of acknowledge it. So we are trying to defend it technically in the case. We are also running a coalition that is trying to drive public comments and influence this in the public narrative. And candidly, we've been so focused on the technical side, we haven't lifted a lot of that up, except for the hearing that I mentioned earlier. So probably over the next 5 or 6 months, you're going to hear a lot about opportunities to take action on this and weigh in. I also was just successful in getting a foundation to fund a dedicated organizer for our coalition that will help take this up to the next level. And it's going to be housed through a group called We Want Green Too. They're a frontline Black-led anti-racist environmental justice group in Detroit. So we're doing this the right way, and it's pretty cool. But the inflection points are the administrative law judge, that's what ALJ stands for, is going to make his or her proposal for decision. It's like a recommendation of what they think the commission should do. In July, that's a big inflection point for us. And then the commission makes an initial order at the end of August, and then completes the case, finalizes everything at the end of October, barring any unforeseen circumstances. The other thing to flag here too is that there are probably going to be some negotiations behind the scenes with DTE, and parties intervened in this too. So we might have an opportunity to maybe get a legal settlement to where we can, find some common ground agreement, put it before the commission and see if they'll approve it so that we don't have to duke this out and fight everything over.
We have a question in the chat, which is, do you know why they are continuing to have 1 unit of Monroe Brick coal in defiance of what there is no coal by 2030? From Oliver.
Yeah, great question, Oliver. So, and just speaking this into the room a bit. So Governor Gretchen Whitmer last year had her EGLE, that's the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, develop what they call the My Healthy Climate Plan. This is essentially a plan for achieving carbon neutrality for all of Michigan's economy by 2050. And one of the key recommendations or facets of that is moving the state beyond coal in 2030. So this plan would be in direct violation with that plan. However, that plan is non-binding. It's an administrative plan. It largely serves to give recommendations and guidance and tells us what now we need to enact through state law or through the Public Service Commission or the courts and other places. So yeah, absolutely, it flies in the face. And that's one of the main strategies we've had is actually our testimony says this, contradicts the governor's climate plan. DTE, don't you want to align with the governor on this? And, if not, maybe the governor's going to need to step in and do something about it, right? And in the public, that's one of the comments that we're hearing at that virtual public hearing, 40 different people said that. So absolutely nailed it, Oliver.
And then he has another question, which is, where do I donate to support Beyond Coal legal efforts?
Oh, hell yeah. That's awesome. So we actually have 2 of our awesome development officers here in the room. Laura, who is development director for our state chapter, and Amy, who is our development director for the entire central region of the country nationally. And they would be happy to talk to you about this. I think maybe we could, if you want to throw your email in the chat, one or both of them can follow up with you about this. And specifically, I'll just put a plug in for the Sierra Club's environmental law program. This is who essentially leads all of our interventions at the State Public Service Commission, in the courts, challenging permits, achieving these settlements. And they are one of the savviest, most succinct and successful entities of any organization doing environmental work or any nonprofit advocacy in the country. And they have people that support the work that I'm doing and the work that my colleagues are doing in every single state in this country. So yeah, your donation would be greatly appreciated. Just candidly, when there's a Democrat in the White House and the economy is, kind of in flux, people aren't as generous with their money. And so actually the Sierra Clubs had to pull back. I was actually preparing to hire 2 new staffers to join and train to work on building electrification, energy burden, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and some other cool campaigns. And we just don't have the funding to do that anymore. So we had to put that on pause. And if we raise more money, maybe we'll get to do that. But otherwise, it's just me and my nimble team and colleagues and stuff. So please, the state chapter is facing the same exact thing. So yeah, please be generous if you can. And we'd be happy to talk to you about it.
I could just share a quick anecdote about the Monroe plant while you have that.
Please, yes.
So I used to take my students there on a field trip. And there were a couple of things that really stuck in my mind. So first of all, the coal that powers that plant, at least back when we used to go there, is strip mine coal from Wyoming. And it comes in trains. And they have a 100-car train load, 100-car train of coal every 11 hours in those days. I think they operated at a more efficiency than maybe now. And there's a machine that just tips the coal out of the car while it's still coupled, and then the next one comes up and pours out more. And the pile of coal was just monumental, and as one of my students commented, you could hide Pioneer High School in that pile of coal. And the guy said, yeah, we like to keep 6 months supply on hand, you know, just in case, it's just comfortable, so that's getting burned, and it's making these lights that we see, and it's going into our air, you know, and then people are fussing about solar panels.
Exactly. I think you nailed it. And the other thing that you hit on that I haven't mentioned yet is like all of the coal that we burn in Michigan comes from places outside of Michigan. So we're just sending money out of state, essentially to the west and the east coast where they're mining for coal and destroying those communities, and essentially, you know, supporting the continued like mountaintop removal and all the other terrible like land practices that come with mining for coal. So yeah, like you want to talk about creating jobs and investing in our own state economy. You know what doesn't like have to import or export energy? Solar and wind. You know, also efficiency, right? You know, you don't have to go out of state or send your money out of state for these solutions. So DTE also has to, and all the utilities in Michigan that are regulated by the commission have to file a rate case whenever they want to increase your rates. In the news lately, it was very prominent that DTE has now requested the largest rate increase, what we think is the largest rate increase in the history of Michigan's rate cases. The commission recently rejected one of DTE's requests to increase the rates because of dramatic like turnout, organizing, coalition power that like we and our allies showed before the commission. I think they only got like a 3% increase, and they had requested like double-digit increases. But what's interesting about this is also the rate cases are the place where the utility files like all of their program proposals. And so if you want to get in the nitty gritty and like get a utility to do something, the rate case is a great place to get involved and like zoom in on something that's less than just like the IRP is like, what does your whole energy portfolio look like? In the rate case, we can be like, DTE, we want you to incentivize vehicle electrification charging at homes, at apartments, at community centers. We can get them to do building electrification programs. We actually just got a settlement with Consumers Energy where now they're going to be piloting converting customers who get their home heating from propane and delivered fuel oils over to electricity instead. It's going to save them money. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to be cleaner. They're not going to be dependent on fuel oil, which has super volatile prices, you know, especially petroleum, propane. And so we regularly intervene in these rate cases, and we zoom in on like every different program we have an interest in. We advocate for what they should be doing. And we've actually had a lot of success doing that as well, while simultaneously rejecting like the huge rate increases that DTE keeps proposing. Yeah.
Do we pay for their lobbying?
Good question. Yes and no. It's murky, some, but not all, not the majority. And candidly, there is a group called the Energy and Policy Institute that is like a national think tank and watchdog nonprofit that we ally with. They track all of the utility companies across the country and all of their political and lobbying spending. And they have like an encyclopedia of like all of the spending DTE does and where it comes from, or as much as you can trace. Unfortunately, a lot of it is like, you know, dark money is just like how politics operates and is the law of the land in our country and in our state, unfortunately. So a lot of it is hard to trace exactly where it goes to. They're not supposed to be using ratepayer money for that. You know, they say it's shareholder money or donations that they raise voluntarily from staff and community members and stuff like that. But, you know, you can read between the lines. I think a lot of that's bullshit. But I can't speak more definitively on that now. But again, Google the Energy and Policy Institute or email me and I'll send you the reports on it. It's like, I mean, they did the most recent report was they donated to 93% of Michigan state lawmakers. And so like, even our best friends at the Capitol are like getting money from DTE and Consumers Energy, you know, that's the power dynamics, just candidly. And we don't have the money to match that, you know, not even close. I mean, I can't even hire 2 new staffers, you know, they have an army of lobbyists. They have multiple firms lobbying on their behalf. They're, you know, spending multiple millions of dollars. So the current rate case, it was just filed last month. we're going to file our testimony in June. After that, we'll start ramping up some of the public advocacy more meaningfully, but a lot of our allies are already doing that. So we can help you connect with them if you're interested in that. The judge will make the recommendation in October, and then this should conclude sometime in December, maybe January of next year. Someone asked about this earlier. Erica asked, or maybe Nancy asked about offsets and, like decarbonizing, but in the wrong way. So DTE has what they call voluntary green pricing programs, and actually all of the utility companies in Michigan are required to do this. What's interesting is that DTE has two programs, one that's for electricity and one that's for gas. The one that's for electricity is actually somewhat legitimate and worthwhile. Essentially, you just enroll as a customer and you can choose how much of a percent you want your electricity to come from clean renewable energy. This is in addition to what they've committed to in their integrated resource plan and the filings that we've been through. So it adds clean energy to the grid. And because clean energy is so cheap and efficient in Michigan right now, wind in particular, but also solar, DTE has essentially taken the surcharge you would pay to get that extra clean energy off the table, and now it's completely free. In fact, they will pay you like a cent or like a fraction of a cent or something to sign up for this program and get as much of your electricity from clean energy as you want. It's so dramatically beating gas and coal and nuclear as well in economics that it's like way cheaper than they ever expected. Also, gas prices, just with the war in Ukraine, all sorts of things around the globe, the pandemic, gas prices have become super volatile and just like spiked a bunch. And so their economics are way worse than they were just like 3 years ago. So anyway, their electric green pricing program is actually a decent proposal. However, they changed that you have to pay a little surcharge right now. You don't pay one because it's cheaper, but that changes every year. It changes through a proceeding at the Public Service Commission. The next update is this June or July. So like, if you sign up for the program, you're going to have to check it every year to make sure they're not just all of a sudden going to start charging you extra for it. Candidly, the real solution is just going like solar, like, you're at your home, or, if the state would just allow us to do it, to build community renewable energy and just buy into that. If you sign up for their program, you're, losing out on the benefits of creating your own locally sourced energy and, creating it right on site and like the resiliency of your home or your building and kind of all that type of stuff. But say, if you're in an apartment or a condo complex that outlaws these things, or, the state doesn't let us do community renewable energy, or it has like caps and bad financing on if you want to, do rooftop solar, then this is a good alternative, at least in the meantime, until we come up with some better solutions. Yeah, Steve?
What's the prospect for lifting that 1% cap on distributed energy generation and also community solar?
So Steve asked about, Michigan has a 1% cap on what's called distributed generation. It's essentially like small scale solar, rooftop solar in your backyard, at an individual level, or like small, like a church, a nonprofit building, an institution, not a utility scale thing that is providing like 8 gigawatts like Consumers is planning to build. Excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. Steve, can you say that again?
It's illegal in Michigan.
Yeah, so there's a 1% cap on that, and DTE has refused to raise that. Consumers Energy we have successfully, through again legal interventions. I talked about DTE's rate case. Consumers Energy also files rate cases. We have gotten Consumers Energy to increase their cap through their rate case as part of settlements there. Consumers Energy, like 2 years ago, we got them to raise it from 1% to 2%. Just recently, we filed a settlement and it was approved by the Public Service Commission to double that up to 4%. So we've been successful in doing this for Consumers Energy. DTE is playing hardball. They really hate it more than Consumers Energy and are just unwilling to do this. And I think a lot of people saw the politics changing in Michigan after the 2022 election, with our state legislature, coming into power for Democrats instead of Republicans. But the utility companies have very good relationships with a lot of Democrats. We just talked about they donated to 93% of state lawmakers. They're pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into political campaigns. And so I candidly just don't think the power dynamics in Lansing have changed enough for us to change this at the state level through the legislature, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And in fact, my colleagues at the state chapter, Tim Minotis and Christy McGillivray, who run our lobbying at the state level. They are actively working on this on a daily basis. They're going to be planning a lobby day at the Capitol in May, where we'll likely be talking about some of these things and other opportunities for you to like take action on this. So candidly, not great, but I don't want to take away all hope, just being real with you. Yeah.
Another question in the chat from Oliver. When the power companies signed up for power purchase agreement under the Michigan Green Power Program, how did that work? Capital infusion or paying a higher rate revenue?
Yeah, great question. So we don't like this, but large industries, often when they do huge, clean energy commitments, they get like industrial sweetheart rates where they have to pay less than say a commercial or a residential customer would pay to do that same thing. And so that's how it worked. Ford in particular has signed the largest contract with DTE. It's the largest voluntary green pricing contract or agreement of any utility or entity like this side of the Mississippi. And it's like the third largest in the country. I forget the figure, but it's like somewhere between 600 and like 1,000 megawatts, I want to say, of solar and wind. And so because they did it at that scale, they got sweetheart deals. We were not cool with that, but unfortunately, we didn't have the legal levers that we needed to reject that. So yeah, I wish we could have stopped that or gotten a better deal so that it potentially doesn't put more burden on other classes of ratepayers, but candidly, our state laws are not set up that way. And in fact, even our legislature likes giving giant corporate handouts to get, industrial manufacturers here because, we're the heartlands of the country and we build things and that's what the politicians think they have to do to get reelected, Yeah, great question, Oliver. So I mentioned DTE also has this program on the gas side of things. So most people that are DTE electric customers also get gas from DTE. Some get from Consumers Energy or other entities, but you can do the same thing on gas. But the problem is instead of building like wind or solar to replace that, they do offsets. They do stuff that we're not cool with. They will be like, oh, okay, you signed up for our gas, green program. We won't cut a forest or some trees up in northern Michigan, but they weren't already planning to cut those trees. So like what benefit does that even have, right? Maybe if they were like planting new trees that are actually going to like suck some of that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere or, contribute in a meaningful way, like that would have value. But the way they've set it up right now is meaningless. And Sierra Club is actually the only environmental nonprofit in Michigan or the region that has a staff forest ecologist expert, Marvin Roberson. He lives and works in the Upper Peninsula, but goes across Michigan, essentially surveying different forests and like areas of biodiversity and weighing in with our Department of Natural Resources on how they should manage those places. He did a bunch of data and analysis to show that this program is just total bullshit. So don't sign up for the gas voluntary green pricing program. The electric one maybe is okay. Like all sorts of false solutions on the gas side of things. They're also like, sign up for our gas program and we will use factory farm waste. We'll convert it to energy and then use that, and that'll help. But like, okay, so you're going to incentivize more industrial agricultural waste in order to create, energy to offset your gas usage. Like that's just a bunch of hypocrisy wrapped in a, like it's got a bow on top, but it's not actually a real solution. And then I wanted to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. So when I first stepped into this role with the Beyond Coal campaign in 2019, one of the things I wanted to change, and I think was changing in our organization, was in the past, we used to just like shut down coal plants. That was what the Beyond Coal campaign did. We've been very successful with that. So we've needed to change, but also just that's the wrong way to do things. Like you also need to care about like what happens to the community when that coal plant shuts down, right? The community depends on revenue from that coal plant, the municipality, the township, the county, the city. There are a lot of jobs there. We need to make sure that those workers get transferred to somewhere else within the utility or find other livelihoods or have the training to transfer into solar or wind jobs and things like that. And also just like what happens to the site, once they, shut down the coal plant, well, there's like all this legacy of toxic pollution in the ground and the water, and you got to clean that up. But like oftentimes utility companies are like, well, we shut it down. We did our thing. We're good, and so the Sierra Club and in Michigan in particular, we have been like vigilant about not letting that be our strategy. And one of the best examples is we got a legal settlement with DTE last year. that shut down the St. Clair coal plant, the River Rouge coal plant, and the Trenton Channel coal plant. But it also got DTE to spend $5.5 million electrifying buses all throughout the most polluted communities around those coal plants. And on top of that, they had to spend almost $4 million essentially just on community environmental projects that were chosen by one of our environmental justice leaders in Southwest Detroit, in the most polluted zip code in Michigan, the third most polluted zip code in the country. This is 48217. It's Southwest Detroit, River Rouge, and E-Course. And so I'm just going to read off a couple examples, so in River Rouge, $830,000 of the settlement went to installing new air filtration systems at a prep academy where over 30% of the students face asthma because they live in this terribly polluted zip code. In all three communities, we got $500,000 for establishing what would become the United States' first, tongue twisted. We got $500,000 for what would become the first ever Alzheimer's park in the United States, a park designed for specifically for folks with special needs, employment placement, green job training that would interconnect River Rouge, E-Course, and Southwest Detroit. So I think a lot of times people get flack, they hear beyond coal and that's it. That's not how we operate. And this is, I think, the most meaningful example of that. And then the last thing I want to share with you all today is the work we do on what's called energy burden. Energy burden is essentially the percentage of your income that you pay for energy and home heating, energy and gas, or whatever your heating fuel is. If you pay more than 6% of your income to your electricity or gas bills, your home heating bills, you are energy burdened. We see pockets of this, in particular in Detroit and Flint, but all across the state, where people are paying like 25, 30% of their incomes for their utility bills. And this is unacceptable. And it also parallels with historic legacy of racist policies like redlining. You know, it's no surprise that the blackest and the brownest communities that have a history of redlining in Detroit and Flint are the areas that have the least efficient homes and are spending the most of their income on this. So it's a real problem. And we got, again, legal settlements through the Public Service Commission. The utilities are required to file what are called energy waste reduction dockets. It's essentially just efficiency. It's what I was talking about earlier. It's doing like insulation and, you know, more efficient light bulbs for their customers. And so we got settlements essentially forcing them to do more of that and to put meaningful resources into the most energy burdened neighborhoods, like not just like zip codes or cities, but like zooming in on specific neighborhoods and blocks that have histories of redlining and are experiencing this in the worst ways. So we've done it for DTE and Consumers Energy. Here's a snapshot of what Michigan looks like. The darker red, the worse. And so you can see, like, it's not just Detroit, it's not just Flint. A lot of rural northern Michigan in the lower peninsula and the upper peninsula face this. And in fact, there are 3 sections in the upper peninsula that are like really atrocious for this. But zooming in on Detroit, this is to show you what I was talking about earlier. This is the map of redlining. This is the map of energy burden. You can see there are a lot of parallels here. Also, asthma rates, you can see they're in the same places. The communities that are taken advantage of by industrial polluters are just, you know, on that 48217 zip code in nearby area. Same place where they have the least efficient homes and spend the most on powering them. Up in Flint, Genesee County, you can see the same exact thing, energy burden and race. It's like almost a direct parallel of the people facing the worst energy burdens. And in Washtenaw County here, probably no surprise to many folks in the room, Ypsilanti is where we see the deepest energy burden. And just a quick zoom in, it's not as dire as some of the other places I was talking about where it's up to like 25, 30% energy burden, but you're still talking like 7.5%, 13% for low income customers. That's really problematic. And so that's kind of where I think the focus in Washtenaw County should be to focus on this. And you can see it's kind of hard to do, but these 2 tracks, you can see directly dovetail. It's over 50% Black populations in those communities and not all the white areas surrounding them. So I have said a lot. I'm sorry, I took way more time than I think I was allotted. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Can you go back to the last slide you just showed, me? Just flash right through.
Sorry,
So
yes.
you're showing our area. Let's break some of this down. Okay. Block lighting.
Yeah, so Black over 50% of the population in particular, these two areas right here are the same as these two on the map before showing the deepest energy burden pockets. Ann Arbor, I think does have some energy burden issues, in particular, the Bryant neighborhood, I know on the south side of the city has like the largest share of Black and brown residents, and the people that are paying the highest percent of their livelihoods towards energy, but you'd probably really need to zoom in on the map to see that dramatically. And again, that's race, sorry, this is energy burden.
That, okay, you can stay with this slide, because it's the same thing. This one where you show the lower orange section there, and it looks like a road underneath it, would that be Clark Road?
Ooh, I don't know if
No,
you
I
would
don't
actually,
think-
I'm guessing it's a highway. Here,
Clark Road is north of it. Yeah, that's,
is that 94?
To the north. Oh,
It's
I-
94 just
yeah,
running
yeah,
under.
yeah, so you're not even showing another area that's just north of Ypsilanti, that's another really important region.
I know these are the two pockets that jump out, and where I got this from, and also is from a public tool that you all can access if you want to dig in and find out more, or want me to like go in and find out, you know, more about specific areas. I mentioned this earlier, the Sierra Club has an analyst team, and they put together essentially based on like all publicly available data, a dashboard online that you can just go to and pick out whatever city, township, county, state, and go through all the different things. I was just looking at energy burden levels, how it compares to redlining history, to race demographics, also to other things like age, income level, all sorts of other stuff if you're interested in it. And so shoot me an email. I will get you the link to that tool and you can play around with it, or just email me what you're looking for. And I can like zoom in on that portion of the map and send you kind of whatever you need there.
We have one more question from Oliver. Is there a distributed energy rate in the evaluation pending for DTE?
Distributed energy generation rate pending for DTE. I don't believe so. In their rate case, their last rate case, they proposed essentially decreasing dramatically the amount that you would get paid for having solar at your home or your small business or your community, you know, building. But that was rejected by the Public Service Commission, as I mentioned earlier, thanks in large part to us and our coalition allies advocating. The current rate case, candidly, it's over 5,000 pages long between testimony and exhibits. So our experts, they filed it last month. We are still working through it. Our experts are still going through all the details and like fact finding and preparing like a understandable, you know, few page document that I can then share or report out with you in a meaningful way. So I think there might be something in there on, you know, they often call it like the grid charge or the grid tariff. There might be something in there on that, but I'm not certain. So when I find out, I will be sure to share that information, or shoot me an email. And as soon as our experts are done filing through this thing and making it understandable to normal people, I'll get that to you.
And then Carol said thanks.
Oh, you're welcome, Carol. Thank you. Any other questions or comments while we're here?
Look at this national, what state does this the best in terms of, you know, shifting away from coal to alternative energy? Is it a state like Iowa, or where is it?
Canada is California, New York, you know, places like Vermont. It's places that have had progressive politics for many decades. Minnesota is the shining example in the Midwest. Illinois is close on their heels. Illinois just passed a groundbreaking law last year that is going to commit the state to 100% clean energy economy by 2050, and does like meaningful stuff along the way, interim goals. They actually fixed the problem Mike Buza addressed earlier about citing wind and solar through that state law. So yeah, Minnesota and Illinois are the best at it in the Midwest in particular.
But yeah, very red states like Iowa and Texas probably have the most.
Yes.
Renewables in their portfolio. And I get it that those are windy places, But is it really that much greater? You know, we have a 15% renewable portfolio, and I think both of those states produce over 40% renewables. Is it only a function of the weather, or are there other reasons why they are so far ahead of?
It's economics. There's money to be made, and it's, you know, because the wind is so strong in those places, the land is so available, the regulatory, you know, schemes are very friendly and favorable to that as well. They're just like miles ahead of us, and yeah, the economics are very favorable, but Michigan is not like far behind on economics. I showed you earlier that like if you tried to build one of those gas plants that were proposed, or if you were to compare that against like just clean energy and efficiency, it's cheaper to just do the clean energy and efficiency, even in Michigan. You know, people complain, oh, the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't always blow. Well, you know what? We have a ton of that in Michigan. We're actually really well set up on that, despite what people believe or think. The facts are not there with the skepticism. And we haven't really talked about or explored this yet, but offshore wind is where you can see like just gargantuans, like magnitudes, economies of scale. You know, it is very hard to figure out technically. It can be expensive upfront, and we're just kind of starting to figure this out really on the East Coast right now. Like Maryland is diving into this. Biden just approved a few permits to start doing this. But there, at one point, were discussions to do this in the Great Lakes. Jennifer Granholm, actually our then governor and now Department of Energy secretary, was kind of leading that exploration. It never went anywhere. It's very challenging politically to get anybody to let you put anything in a Great Lake. And, you know, just candidly, the environmental and political side of it are like tough to navigate. So, you know, we have not been focusing on that, but the Great Lakes have a huge wind potential in particular. It's kind of interesting. And then one of the other things that you brought up, Dan, that hits on is transmission is becoming more important than ever. It's like how you get energy from one place to another. And so, you know, like it's just windier in Iowa and Texas and all the other things I mentioned of why they have more wind already, or they're further ahead of us. And so, you know, in some cases, it does actually make sense to like have, you know, wind coming from Iowa and then solar coming from, you know, other places that have a bunch of sun, and then, you know, geothermal coming from other places, and like using them to mix and match and like, you know, kind of fill in the different gaps on the grid. But there are major limitations to the grid, especially Michigan's connection to it. Because Michigan is a peninsula, we are essentially on an island. The group that regulates this, MISO, for like our region in the Midwest, you know, they're obviously much more focused on like these states here, and, you know, kind of like, you know, it's supposed to go both ways, but it's very challenging. We're kind of in a bottleneck. So there are tough issues with building new transmission lines, right? Like it takes a lot of land to do this. And that is like not a good thing for the environment or people that care about their land, or whatever, you know, stuff that's going through. But a lot of people nationally in particular are looking at this as a solution, and some even in Michigan. So we'll see.
Looking at what?
Transmission, building like large transmission lines between, say, Michigan and Iowa or Ohio or Illinois, or, you know, other places around the country, even Texas, you know. Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple times of some of the issues around like public opinion and like information. Is there some place that where there's like kind of easily communicated and easily shareable bits of information or infographics or things that people can share?
Sure. And, you know, I mean, on all sorts of different things, you know, I've got a handful, just like, if you're looking for anything specific, you know, we've got like access to a lot of different tools and maps and like one pagers and things like that. But there are also a lot of groups outside the Sierra Club that do this stuff too. Like I'm thinking of, there's a group, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They do all sorts of stuff on this. All of their information is available, not just on like the technical side, but also on like polling. What do people in each state think about this stuff? How does it break down based on age and race and politics and stuff like that too? So it's out there, and I don't have all of it at my fingertips right now, but if anyone's interested in something specific, just like shoot me an email. And it might take me a few days because my inbox gets pretty full pretty quickly, but I promise to do my best to get back and share whatever resources we have.
All right. Let's give Mike Berkowitz some. Thank you for sharing your passion and your expertise. This is long overdue to have you present to us. I also wanted to tell people out there that Mike Buzza and I agreed that he's going to present to us about the siting issue in the fall, and he already presented to Crossroads recently. So that's really good to, to learn more about this. You certainly taught all of us a lot tonight. Thank you, Mike. I think we'll wrap it up. And thanks to the Zoomers and thanks to the people who came in person, and thank you.
We had a 10.
Yeah, great.